Hey guys, thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Jody, this is Sebastian.
Hi guys.
And we have two subcompact crossovers that we're going to compare head to head to see which one's better. We have the Honda HR-V and the Nissan Rogue Sport, which is also called the Qashqai in other markets. And it's not a super sexy comparison, but it is important, right?
Yeah, well, the subcompact SUV segment is super important these days, and these are two of the best sellers in the segment. So both offer lots of space, they both look kind of funky, and they both offer fairly good fuel economy. But they kind of made some compromises along the way. So which deserves your money more?
So we're driving the Rogue Sport now, and the first time I drove the Rogue Sport or the Qashqai, I was actually pretty impressed. But once I spent more time with it, like things started to fall apart.
Well, look, it's not a driver's car. It is not for, taking hard corners. It is totally the opposite of that.
But it doesn't need to be that.
Well, yeah, exactly. Although I will say that as I picked this up from the media lot and then drove, and somebody stopped short in front of me, and I swear to God, I thought I was going to die, because I jumped on the brakes and nothing was happening. It probably didn't hurt that I had just been in a Mustang, so my expectations were a little high.
Right.
But there's a lot of slop in all of the controls. The steering wheel is one finger.
Yeah, you've just been doing this the whole time.
You can pretty easily steer this with one finger. And then the brakes are really mushy, and then you push the throttle down hard and
nothing happens.
There's a little bit more sound, but yeah, you're right, nothing else happens. But the sound isn't too bad for a CVT. I mean, it's a little drony, but it's pretty quiet. It's off in the background, so it's not too bad.
I mean, if you're not looking to get anywhere quickly, it'll do the job. Yeah. It's not any fun, but it will do the job.
It will do the job.
Yeah.
Give yourself ample on-ramp time, though, because 10 seconds doesn't sound like a lot. But there are some on-ramps where it can be pretty,
Yeah, like when there's
short.
a truck just charging at you, and you're like, I don't know if I'm going to make it.
Oh, God, we're not going to make it, Mabel.
Yeah, but in general, everything's a little bit squishy here. It leans a lot in the corners. Yeah. But strangely enough, the suspension is a little bit crashy.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you can hear that. We've been driving over, admittedly not a great road, but it's still it's a regular road. We haven't looked for anything bad. And you can really hear it. It's a little crashy. I don't find these seats all that comfortable.
Mm-hmm. And you sit up in a really high seating position, which I know a lot of people like, but it feels kind of awkward for me.
And it feels a little bit awkward for me. But you can go really high. You're going to see me crush my head against the ceiling now.
You might be out of frame.
I think I've gone out of frame now. I have officially.
You got to crank that back down.
I got to crank that back down. But even at the lowest setting, you really do feel high up, and you're in a chair. You're sitting in a kitchen chair rather than in a car, as I'm used to.
I know some old people who would love this seating position because it's so easy to get in and out of. Yeah, because of your hips or your bad back or something like that.
Just slide right in and out of it.
Yeah, so I don't know. For us, it might be a negative, but I think a lot of other people might really appreciate that.
And that's one of the things about this car, is that a lot of these things that I'm not particularly fond of it for seem like choices. They seem like conscious choices that Nissan made, and so they're kind of forgivable for that reason.
Yeah, and so one of the things that I really liked about the Qashqai was that it just feels like a Rogue, which is why they call it a Rogue Sport in the US. And it doesn't feel like a cheaper version of the Rogue.
No, you're right.
None of these materials are less nice than the stuff you find in a Rogue.
No, and it's a little less impressive than the HR-V just jumping into it, because there are a lot of buttons, and there's kind of an older vibe going on in here.
Yeah.
But as you drive it, you understand why they did that, because all of the buttons are immediately available. So you can find stuff. There's a map button and a nav button, so you can just decide which one you need.
I found this a lot more user-friendly right off the bat, because in the Honda HR-V, you have to find menus through a touchscreen. There are no hard buttons.
Yeah.
And so when you're driving and you have to keep your eyes on the road, but also turn up your fan speed, you don't have to poke around on a touch capacitive thing. Your finger can just find the button and you can hit it. It's not great though. The infotainment system is a little bit slow. When you press these buttons, there's a little bit of a delay.
Yeah, there's a bit of lag time.
Yeah.
But there's a lot there too. There's a lot of technology in this interior.
What the Rogue Sport has that the Honda HR-V doesn't have is that it has an all-wheel drive lock.
Right.
So you could push a button down there
Down
and you can
here,
guarantee
by
that
your
there's
knee.
power going to all 4 wheels, although I'm like a little bit suspicious of that too. I don't actually think it's happening.
And some of these buttons are actually in bad places. Like the all-wheel drive lock button, the steering wheel heater, and the eco button are all right by my knee, which is, I'm not that afraid of running into them, but it took me a week to find where they were.
Well, you also have to take your eyes off the road to like go down there and push the button.
There's a
so
down here?
It could be a better way if it was on the dashboard somewhere, if it was a bit more easily accessible.
Yeah.
The other thing this has that the Honda doesn't have is adaptive cruise control.
Yeah, which
I found worked really well in this.
I totally agree with you.
Yeah, like surprisingly smooth and progressive with all the inputs. Like other cars in this segment are not that refined with their adaptive cruise, if they even have it. They're really jerky, they slam on the brakes, and I just end up not using it because it doesn't feel natural enough. This one was fine.
No, this one did a really good job. I even had somebody pull out in front of me, like sort of, not really cut me off, but sort of cut me off, and it reacted very smoothly. And it was one of those things where you're nervous, like, ah!
You're not sure if it's going to do it or not.
But it did it perfectly. Like, and it was really anticlimactic in the best way possible. Like, it's a very good system.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And so just going back to the tech, and I know they kind of aim this car towards millennials. And what do millennials want? We want USB ports! But this one only has one.
That's kind of crazy.
And it's not even a fast charging one.
No, it's just a regular USB port. They also have an aux cord, which is weird. This is like a throwback.
Because nobody uses those anymore.
Who the heck uses an aux cord?
I have no idea.
Yeah, that's weird.
Although something I do really like tech-wise is how easy this car is to park.
Yeah.
And it is a tech feature because it has this really awesome 360-degree camera. So,
which is really unexpected in a car in this segment. Like that's.
I don't think any other car in this segment comes with the top-down 360-degree camera.
Yeah, that's huge.
It makes parking so easy, parallel parking. And I know it's not a huge car anyway, but that kind of tech really helps people, and I think they love that. I love that. Yeah. And I know how to park.
And it really impresses your friends.
It really does. But it's also a smart system because if you put it in drive, it'll show you the front camera view. If you put it in reverse, it'll show you the rear camera view.
Yeah.
And at all points, you can always see
all the way around.
Yeah. So it's a really intuitive system. And it's little things like that. It just makes it easier to live with.
Yeah. Speaking of the interior, I do think that despite it having premium features like the Rogue Sport, would it have killed them to put a splash of color in here? It's a little... The materials are all right. There's some scratchy plastic over here.
Yeah, there's some hard plastic in places. I mean, it's not bad, but it's so easy for them to put color trim. Like this black trim, why not make it green to match the exterior, right?
And it would add a little bit of color. It would make this way more effort, like
just a bit more exciting to be in.
Yeah, it would give it a personality, and it would make it, instead of all this black on black on black.
It is a bit drab in here, and even this black plastic, I don't like it. It has this kind of sparkly finish on it, but it looks like dust.
It just looks dirty constantly.
I don't get it.
Yeah, it doesn't look that bad, and it's nothing that you wouldn't expect out of a economy car. But given that the exterior has this funky color and it looks real good, it's a little disappointing to step inside and to have this sort of nondescript interior.
Yeah, like just bringing another competitor into the mix. The Hyundai Kona, which we love, has these awesome little matte lime green finishes all over the inside. And without it, the interior looks average. But with it, it has so much personality and it pops.
Yeah.
And it's not that hard to do.
Yeah, I don't see where the marginal cost is in that. Like, it's really slim.
I mean, it's the same plastic bit, it's just a different color, right? Yeah. So with the Rogue Sport, it's kind of important to mention that when the Nissan Kicks arrives here, that'll be kind of the true competitor to the HR-V, because this is actually quite a bit bigger.
Yeah, and it sort of gives you an idea of just how busy this subcompact crossover SUV segment is, that Nissan figures that it can fit the Rogue Sport, and the Kicks all within it.
And the Juke.
And the Juke, yeah, and have them all sell.
Yeah.
So it's a wildly growing segment.
So this is kind of a weird CUV because it's an in-betweener. Mm-hmm. I mean, and because it's so much bigger than the HR-V, it's pretty much the only one in its class with this much cargo capacity.
Right, which gives it a win immediately.
Yeah. But. I mean, people love that practicality, but the HR-V is also huge, and up until this guy came along, the HR-V had the most cargo capacity, and now all of a sudden it doesn't.
And with those magic seats, it sort of still makes an argument for itself. But on the power front, they both have exactly the same amount of, they both have 141 horsepower.
Right. The Rogue Sport has more torque.
Yeah.
About 20 more torques.
About 20 more torques, which you can kind of feel. Like, it does feel...
It feels a little bit more alive.
A little bit more,
Just a little bit.
neither is particularly. They're both pretty slow.
You're not going to win any races with either of them, but I did appreciate that this at least felt a little bit more alive.
You get a bit of a kick off the line.
Yeah.
The deer selector thing though it's pretty much why I don't even understand why they have it. Sort of doesn't really make a difference.
I mean, the HRV has paddle shifters,
which is kind of weirder.
It's even weirder than this. I really don't understand why it has paddle shifters. It's a CVT
and a sport mode, which is fun.
Just why? I don't get it.
Yeah, you're not going to be winning any races with 141 horsepower, but you might win a race against an HRV or vice versa.
And that's what really counts.
Exactly.
Yeah. So let's get in the HRV and give it a whirl. Okay, so we're in the Honda HRV now, and I'm just gonna get it out of the way. This car gives me no joy. Like, nothing about this car makes me happy.
But you don't.
And that's fine.
Yeah, you're right. No, this is a pretty nondescript car. It's 8 feet of car. It is transportation.
Yeah, I mean, the little engine, it's a naturally aspirated little 4-cylinder.
Which is making the same amount of horsepower as the Nissan with 2 fewer liters, or 0.2 fewer liters of displacement, which is something.
I mean, the worst thing about the HRV is when you're doing full throttle acceleration, it's just screaming, no! Like, it just does not want to go anywhere. You're hearing all of this noise, you're trying to pass someone, and like nothing is happening.
It is fighting against you. It's like, no, I don't want to do it. I don't want.
It is a remarkably unresponsive car.
Yeah.
But, for in the city, it's pretty good. Off the line, it's not bad.
And it's a little tighter, I think. The steering is a little sharper, and the ride's a little firmer, even though I find it a little more comfortable. It's a little...
Right.
It's not as crashy as the Rogue.
It just feels a little bit more refined in terms of driving dynamics than the Rogue Sport.
Yeah, you can tell that the tools that they had to play with were pretty good.
And I like the steering on this. Like, you can't do the one finger turning that you were doing with the Rogue. This is just a little bit firmer.
Absolutely.
A little bit more responsive. Yeah. And I like that.
Same with the brakes. The brakes, when you hit them,
they work.
They do something. You're not afraid of running into the back of every truck that you come across.
Yeah, and so this is quite noisy on the inside. This is a 2018 model. The 2019 model gets a little bit more sound deadening, so it should be improved.
Kind of necessary.
Well, anything to drown out that CVT
that
noise.
Horrible.
It's so it's just so whiny.
Yeah.
And CVTs get a bad rap because of stuff like this.
Because of stuff like this. Yeah, exactly. In the Nissan, it's like it's not a great transmission, but it's whatever. It does its job, and it's kind of inoffensive.
Right.
And this thing, it's kind of yelling at you to please stop.
Yeah, and so that's one of the negatives. One of the positives, and it's always been this way for the HRV, is the massive cargo capacity, which up until the Rogue Sport came along, it had pretty much had the biggest cargo capacity of anything in its segment.
Yeah.
And it has a lot to do with the magic seats.
Those magic seats are pretty dang impressive. And I can do them from the front seat. I can make this seat go up. Yeah. Not that you
made it look so easy the first time. That looked like a bit of a struggle.
That was a bit of a struggle. But I'm not sure why you'd want to do that, but you can. It's super easy to do from the parking lot of the latest IKEA, where you can fit 2 or 3 Mjolnir desks back there. So
yeah, like just having those magic seats makes it so practical, and that's something that people can actually use.
Yeah, that is genuinely functional.
And it's not a gimmick.
Yeah.
And I feel like while we're talking about gimmicks, I want to just go back to this lane watch camera for a little bit.
The lane watch.
So what happens is that when you turn your right signal on, the camera on the side mirror starts feeding like a live feed from what that camera sees, which is your blind spot.
The idea there being that whatever's in your blind spot, that's the worst blind spot. So if you're making a lane change to the right, that's the one that you want the information for.
Right. So it ends up being, like, in theory, I thought it was a really good idea, but the more I used it, the more I kind of lost interest in it.
It's
because to do a lane change, you signal, you look in your mirror, you look again, and then you go. And now there's an extra step where you have to check this lane watch camera which doesn't end up being, it's information that you can get by just doing that,
and
by just doing a shoulder check.
There are any problems with visibility out of this thing? Like,
visibility is great out of this car.
Yeah, this is one of the more visible cars that you can get into.
Yeah.
So instead of having like blind spot monitor where it's just a light flashing, this is all kinds of extra information that you don't need. You get a pretty picture of what's going on behind you, but there's a lot of stuff back there that
you
doesn't
have
really
to
matter.
kind of decipher what's going on, though.
Yeah, exactly. And if you're doing a quick spot check, you don't want to be deciphering. You just want information.
Yeah, the only thing I found it really, really useful for was just double checking for cyclists.
Yeah. Right.
But what are the other positive things about the HR-V? Because it is really good. I know we give it a lot of slack, but it is actually a really good car for what it is.
It's super duper comfortable. Even the magic seats back there are magical in that they're really comfortable to sit in, which I would say is not the Rogue Sport isn't quite as comfortable. Like the back seat they're pretty stiff.
I like this seating position better too.
Yeah.
It just feels more natural, like you're not sitting up in a chair like that.
And it's not low or sporty by any means, but it is just, you feel it's a more natural seating position. Your legs are a little bit more ahead of you rather than under you.
Yeah. I do have an issue with their infotainment setup. So there are no physical buttons, which looks great.
Oh yeah, when you get in this thing, you're like, ooh,
fancy. Because that's what Porsche does.
It's so fancy.
So fancy, but it ends up not being that usable because I have to take my eyes off the road to do anything.
Yeah.
Like my fingers just can't intuitively find a button and push it.
But even if you don't mind not having a button, these touch sensitive things aren't particularly well implemented. Like again, it's menus on menus on menus. So every time you want to look for anything, you have to go through a menu. Whereas the Rogue Sport,
one button.
When you wanted the map, you had a button. When you wanted to enter navigation, you had a different button, and that was easy to find. In this, you have to go through the menus, you got to look, and you're taking precious attention away from the road, as is the backup cam, so it's not that great.
And this one does not come with Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, although the 2019 model, which is coming really soon, will fix that, and that'll come with it, which will help a lot of the usability issues.
Right, that'll be much easier to use, probably.
But in terms of features, it doesn't have as much technology as the Rogue Sport. This doesn't have adaptive cruise control, it doesn't have that locking diff or the all-wheel drive. It's lacking a whole bunch of stuff, and even stuff like blind spot monitoring, which I think is way more useful than the lane watch camera that they have here, doesn't have it.
You don't get it. Yeah, which is a shame, because I guess that's one way to save money rather than having, scratchy materials. But where the Nissan really excels is that it's all of its features that it has. So that's a big plus for it, that this thing just doesn't have access to.
And what we said about the Rogue Sport is that it just feels like a regular Rogue and not like a cheaper version of the Rogue.
Yeah.
Whereas the HR-V, it feels like a cheaper version of the CR-V. Like, you're missing out on a lot of features that I really like in the CR-V, and I know it's at a cheaper price point, but it's obviously cheaper.
Yeah, you can really see where they've cut costs.
Yeah.
Whereas in the Rogue Sport, it's a little harder to see where they've cut costs. So that makes it feel like a nicer thing to be inside of.
Yeah, and I kind of think they could have done a better job with kind of sprucing up the interior and just making it a little bit more fun.
Yeah, like the Rogue Sport, this is kind of a little bit drab inside.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the biggest problems with the HR-V is that it just kind of feels sloppy. Maybe besides the driving dynamics, it feels a little bit cheap.
Well, that's the thing. Everything that's good about this car comes from either the fit or... Well, it comes from the fit, not even the CR-V.
Right.
And everything else that's on top of that kind of feels phoned in.
Yeah, so basically, if you like the fit but need all-wheel drive, this is your option. But if you don't need all-wheel drive, like if you're just going to get a front-wheel drive HR-V, you might as well just get a fit,
the
right?
Fit's, it looks better.
Affordable.
It's more affordable.
It doesn't look like a dorky bean.
It doesn't look like a dorky bean. Yeah, it's just, the Fit's probably the better one to go for, which is this car's major problem.
Right.
Not everything that's cheap in this car is bad, like the trunk cover, which is it's like those laundry hampers that explode.
It's just a piece of wire and cloth, right? Yeah.
Which seems a little bit cheap, but is actually really handy because it folds away. You can get it out of the way, no problem.
Yeah.
And you can pull it out in with one hand in a second, in one action, Whereas
Yeah,
most trunk covers, you gotta like lift and you gotta undo
well,
clips.
we've been taking out the one in the Rogue Sport all day, and
Yeah.
it's like kind of cumbersome because it takes up room once you take it off, and you have to undo those little clips with the strings.
And it's kind of it's a drag, you know. You're
Yeah.
constantly fighting against it. Whereas this one, you can just pull it out with one gesture. You can fold it up and put it away.
Yeah, it doesn't take up any room.
It doesn't take up any room. I think that's a really clever solution, and it's like the magic seats. It's really well thought out, even though it's maybe not it's not made out of leather. It's not a premium thing.
Yeah.
It's just a smart thing.
My first impression was like, what is this? And I chopped it right down.
You wanna fight? What? Your style is no match for mine.
But,
Yeah, you did a
but
karate
in
chop
the
it.
end, it made a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Like, you don't need to have that big, bulky cargo cover there. It does the same job. And I feel like this is kind of there, but it's lacking a couple things that might help it seal the deal for a lot of people.
Again.
Things that make it more usable and more user-friendly.
For a lot of automakers, this would be fine, but for Honda, this kind of feels phoned in.
Yeah,
and you
like, we
kinda hold
expect
that
more for them,
You
right?
kind of hold that against it.
Yeah.
Which might be unfair, but I mean, what are you going to do? That's how the cookie crumbles.
Womp womp.
Womp womp.
But what do you think is the absolute best thing that the HRV does? Better than anything else in its segment? Is there something?
Yeah, I don't know. I can't really think of anything off the top of my head. Like, it drives okay. It drives fine.
But not the best.
But not the best.
And not the worst.
Not the worst. It's fairly comfortable, but on these roads you can still hear it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's not enough sound deadening, so the engine just wails at you.
Listen.
And also, do you see how we weren't thrown into the back of our seats there? It's just, there's not a lot happening.
It's not a very rewarding car to drive, but it doesn't have to be.
It doesn't have to be, but still, it doesn't do that particularly well. Magic seats are great. That's really handy. It's super easy to use. That's good.
Yeah, but in terms of like what Sammy would say, it's killer app. I don't think it has one anymore. you
Yeah,
know?
I don't think so either.
The lane watch camera was something that they were going on and on about, but it's a bit gimmicky. Like,
yeah.
I don't think it's a killer app.
I don't think it really worked out. Yeah, I don't think it's that great, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, you're right. This car doesn't really have a killer app, and it doesn't even have the extra cargo that it used to have because the Rogue Sport has taken over in that
Right.
in that regard. So it's kind of lost in the segment, really, but just kind of lacking or not excelling in any particular area.
Right. It doesn't do one thing really, really, really well.
Yeah.
So in the end, it was actually kind of difficult for us to pick a winner because both of these crossovers are pretty equally matched and they're both pretty good for what they are. Sebastian and I did think that the Honda HR-V was a better driver's car, which is funny because it doesn't really set a high bar in terms of being a driver's car, but it drove better than the Rogue Sport, and we like the magic seats and the massive cargo capacity. But
The Rogue Sport is definitely the one to go with. It's easier to live with, it's way bigger, and it doesn't look like a dorky bean. So that's why it's our winner.